Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're undertaking an elite, mechanism-driven deep dive into the true biological purpose of sleep. Look, we're going way beyond the standard surface-level advice of just getting your 8 hours. Instead, we're going to examine sleep for what it really is, a highly organized, purely physical state of biological maintenance. Over the next few minutes, we'll uncover exactly what's happening inside your brain, how your autonomic nervous system completely rewires itself every single night, and why the slow decay of our sleep architecture might actually be the hidden engine driving human aging.
Okay, let's dive right into this, because sleep presents one of the most profound evolutionary mysteries in all of biology. Every animal on Earth does it, even though it leaves them completely defenseless against predators. So why do it? Well, experimental data gives us a pretty stark answer. If you keep a mammal awake long enough, it's completely fatal within 11 to 32 days. This instantly tells us that sleep is not just a passive state where you're resting. It is an active, non-negotiable survival mechanism. Your brain is performing tasks so physically critical during this time that without them, your biological systems literally collapse. To figure out what the brain is actually doing to keep us alive, we have to look at the electrophysiology of stage N3. You probably know this as slow-wave sleep, or deep sleep. When you're awake, your brainwaves are fast, chaotic, and scattered. Millions of neurons are firing totally independently to process the world around you. But as you drop into slow-wave sleep, that scattered chaos transforms into this massive, coordinated electrophysiological symphony. Entire populations of cortical neurons start firing and going silent in perfect unison, creating these huge delta waves between 0.5 and 4 Hz. The brain totally shifts out of its processing state and locks into a profound, unified maintenance mode.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how this state is even possible. For your brain's physical architecture to change like that, your autonomic nervous system has to pull off a massive shift. It transitions from sympathetic dominance, your typical daytime fight-or-flight mode, into a parasympathetic rest and digest state. This all goes down in a tiny brainstem structure called the locus coeruleus. During the day, it fires constantly, flooding your brain with noradrenaline, keeping you alert, and keeping the physical fluid tunnels in your brain clamped completely shut. But during deep sleep, the locus coeruleus is suppressed. Noradrenaline plummets, your blood vessels relax, and your systemic vascular resistance drops.
And it's exactly that drop in stress neurochemicals that acts as the trigger for a literal power washing of your brain. We call it the glymphatic wash system. Because that noradrenaline is gone, the interstitial space, literally the physical gaps between your brain cells, expands by a massive 60%. Let that sink in. Your brain opens up. Then, the rhythmic pumping of your cardiovascular system physically drives cerebrospinal fluid through these water channels called aquaporin 4, which sit at the ends of astrocytic cells. This fluid sweeps through your brain tissue, dissolving toxic metabolic waste, including amyloid beta, and washes it right out into the peripheral lymphatic system.
Dr. Micah Nadergaard, whose lab helped map this out back in 2012, perfectly captures this paradigm shift. The brain isn't just resting, it's an incredibly highly organized fluid transport state. And here's the kicker. While you are awake, this fluid transport system operates at a 90% reduction. You literally cannot effectively wash your brain while your eyes are open. Without enough slow-wave sleep, those Alzheimer's-linked proteins don't get cleared. They just accumulate. But the brilliance of slow-wave sleep doesn't stop in the skull. This is a system-wide overhaul. As you drop into N3 sleep, your endocrine system completely transforms. You hit an anabolic peak. That means a massive, pulsatile release of growth hormone from your pituitary gland, which drives cellular regeneration, muscle repair, and overall metabolic health. Your body is aggressively building up tissue. And at the exact same time, it's suppressing the hormones that break tissue down. Cortisol, your primary catabolic stress hormone, hits its absolute lowest point of the entire 24-hour cycle. And while your body is busy physically rebuilding itself, your brain is busy securing your reality. It uses an incredibly elegant mechanism called triple-phase coupling. Remember those massive cortical slow oscillations we talked about? They act like a metronome. They trigger these rapid bursts of electrical activity in the thalamus, called sleep spindles. Those spindles then synchronize perfectly with sharp-wave ripples in your hippocampus. Think of the hippocampus as your brain's short-term USB drive. This precise electrical lockstep physically transfers the episodic memories from that short-term holding drive into the neocortex for permanent long-term storage. That lockstep is the literal physical mechanism of learning. So we've established the baseline. Slow-wave sleep is the absolute bedrock of memory, brain cleaning, and physical repair. But what happens when this perfectly synchronized biological network gets older? Well, that brings us to the devastating double hit of midlife.
So, the crucial point here begins with this staggering statistic. Between the ages of 20 and 60, your slow-wave sleep drops by up to 75%. As we age, our sleep architecture structurally degrades. It's not just that we're sleeping a little bit less, it's that we are specifically losing those deep, high-amplitude delta waves that act as the master switch for the restorative mechanisms we just covered.
And remember how slow-wave sleep is the biological trigger for your endocrine recovery? Well, because of that 75% drop in deep sleep, we see a corresponding rapid 80% decline in nocturnal growth hormone secretion over that exact same timeline.
Let's look at how this systemic catastrophe unfolds across a lifetime. In early adulthood, nearly a fifth of your night is spent in glorious, deep sleep. Growth hormone is maxed out. But hit midlife, and slow-wave sleep has plummeted to barely over 3% of your total sleep time. By late life, the biological system is actually working against you. The growth hormone is largely gone, and evening cortisol, that stress hormone that destroys sleep continuity, starts creeping up by 19.3 nanomoles per liter every single decade. You're losing the regenerative hormones, and you're gaining the stress hormones. It creates a destructive feedback loop that literally shatters your ability to stay asleep.
But why does the system fragment so badly? Remember the locus coeruleus, that tiny alarm bell in the brainstem that has to turn off for deep sleep to start? Research shows it actually physically degrades as we enter our 50s. When that degrades, the brain loses its hardware capability to properly shift out of sympathetic dominance, which means the emotional processing centers of your brain can't get the slow waves they rely on to recalibrate overnight. This completely changes how we view late-life anxiety. It isn't just psychological. It is a physiological failure of the aging brain to generate the actual sleep architecture needed to regulate human emotion.
And the long-term cost of failing to protect this architecture is just brutal. Glymphatic function in older subjects, it drops to just 10 to 20% of what it was in their youth. Throw sleep apnea into the mix, and the intermittent lack of oxygen actively promotes amyloid beta formation while simultaneously blocking its clearance. This autonomic imbalance totally wrecks your insulin sensitivity, paving the way for metabolic syndrome. You develop chronic low-grade inflammation, your immune memory is compromised, and your brain literally begins to atrophy. Sleep disruption is not a symptom of aging. It is a primary mechanical driver of metabolic and cognitive decline.
Naturally, knowing all of this, millions of people have started tracking their sleep. The quantified self-movement is everywhere, but we really need to take a skeptical look at how we're measuring these incredibly intricate physiological states.
And this brilliantly illustrates the reality gap. Clinical polysomnography, the gold standard in elite sleep medicine, tracks actual brainwaves, breathing, and oxygen. And even with all that data, human experts agree about 80% of the time. Meanwhile, consumer wearables sitting on your wrist are mostly guessing based on heart rate and movement algorithms, landing at about a 65% accuracy rate for actual sleep staging. Don't get me wrong, they're fantastic for behavioral trends, like knowing if you were in bed for 8 hours. But they are fundamentally incapable of accurately capturing the deep electrophysiological reality of N3 slow-wave sleep. You cannot diagnose these architectural failures with a smartwatch.
So if our wearables can't give us the full picture and biological aging is constantly working against us, how do we take back control? Let's get into some actionable clinical interventions and see exactly how they tie directly back to the biology we just uncovered.
These aren't just your standard sleep hygiene tips you read in a blog. These are strict biological prerequisites for allowing your nervous system to downshift. We prioritize cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia over sleeping pills because CBTI actually trains the brain to naturally build the homeostatic sleep drive. Consistent circadian timing anchors your neurochemical rhythms. A cool, dark environment? That's not for comfort. Dropping your core body temperature is a physical trigger that forces the locus coeruleus to quiet down. And above all, you have to rule out structural barriers like obstructive sleep apnea. If your airway collapses while you sleep, your brain floods with stress hormones to wake you up so you don't suffocate, instantly destroying your slow-wave architecture.
Which perfectly explains the real biochemical reason we're always told to avoid evening alcohol and stimulants. Again, this isn't some moral judgment against a glass of wine with dinner. It is basic fluid mechanics. Alcohol and stimulants chemically force the locus coeruleus to keep firing. And if it's firing, you are stuck in sympathetic dominance. If you're in sympathetic dominance, the interstitial spaces in your brain physically cannot expand by that vital 60%. The physical power washing cycle is chemically locked out from even starting.
But here is a truly fascinating clinical contradiction.
You cannot just drug your way to a clean brain. Researchers ran studies using heavy medications like sodium oxybate, which successfully forces an expansion in the duration of slow-wave sleep on an EEG. But guess what? It didn't inherently accelerate amyloid clearance. Why? Because the physical mechanical arterial pulsations driven by a healthy cardiovascular system are the rate-limiting bottleneck. A heavy drug might force your brainwaves into slow motion, but it can't magically fix stiff, aging arteries that are failing to pump cerebral spinal fluid. You need systemic, whole-body cardiovascular health to clean the brain.
Which leaves us with a profound, paradigm-shifting question to consider. Modern medicine spends billions of dollars trying to treat the downstream consequences of aging, things like cognitive decline, metabolic syndrome, immune failure, and chronic anxiety. But if the aging process inherently dismantles the highly coordinated, regenerative biological state of deep sleep, we have to ask ourselves, are we actually treating the true diseases of aging, or are we just forever chasing the symptoms of our broken sleep architecture? Take this seriously. Protect your deep sleep, because it is quite literally the foundation of your biological survival. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next explainer.